So again, thanks for having me. This is like a really cool course. I'm sorry I couldn't arrive till today because I was on service. But anyway, so we talk about the CTSA today. And so first I just want to see where you guys stand with CTSAs. Raise your hand if you know what a CTSA program is. That's good. Have you used CTSA services at your institution? Okay, less. How about you can explain every component of T0, T1, T2, T3, T4 research? 0. You know what REDCap is? Have you used REDCap? Okay, good. Are you a community engaged researcher? A couple, good. All right, do you know what community engaged research is? Only the ones who are doing it more or less. Okay. Good. So I'm going to mention a couple of these things during the talk today. And again, you know, what I hope to take away is just a broad, sweeping overview of the CTSA program and what it might mean for you all in your future careers. I'm hoping to finish in about 30 minutes, not 45, and that way we'll have plenty of time for either questions or an early break. So just historically speaking, has anyone ever heard of the GCRC? The General Clinical Research Center, right? So this was the precursor to the CTSA program. And for many years, this was a program project grant that NIH would offer that provided resources and infrastructure to promote clinical research. Mostly GCRCs were a place, right? At academic health centers, there was a unit or a place or a physical location where you could do research and have patients enrolled and come in and have studies done on site. So an inpatient or outpatient unit. They had a financial infrastructure backing, right? So the GCRC would pay for ancillary expenses, imaging, lab testing, medications, and this was all, again, an institutional award place like your academic health center would apply for a GCRC program project grant, receive it, and then have money in the bank. And then during that time, what they would do is have a review process. So if you were writing a clinical trial, like you just might be doing now, and you had a GCRC at your place, you would apply to the GCRC and say, hey, when I put this in, I'd like to utilize the GCRC resources. And then they would, if they would review your grant internally at your institution, they would say, yes, if this is funded, we'd like to provide that support for you. And then you would go to the NIH with your application, say, I've already been given the green light to do GCRC funded research if this is awarded. Therefore, the budget will be reduced by these costs. I won't have to ask you at the institute for these monies because they'll come from the GCRC award. Make sense? And there was a history to this that I had to go back and look review articles about it, but there was only 5 awarded in the year 1960, but it grew to quite a few. So by 1969, there were already 93 of these. And in a way, it was meant to stimulate the clinical research center at the NIH. And then they had things built into it, like special research fellowships and special programs. When I came to Cincinnati back in '99, I applied for and was invited to attend a special research symposium where we got flown to another city and learned all about complex genetics, which was great, although I've never done anything with genetics since that time. But it was a thought at the time. That's how research goes. You change your direction. So here is a picture of the phases of translational research, and you can see that T0 is really basic and applied science with preclinical and animal studies. T1 and T2 was really the sweet spot for the GCRC, right? So translation to humans with phase 1, and then translation to patients with phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. And you can see where the physical location of a GCRC would be a very good place to carry out that form of research. But you know, now, depending on what you read, there's T3 and T4 and T5 and T6 and all kinds of T-labeled phases of research. And in a sense, I think you just want to say, taking that information that we gained from the research done in phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials and translating it into real practice, right? And there's a real science to that in terms of understanding phase 4 trials, clinical outcomes, clinical effectiveness at the population level, implementation, and effectiveness in the real world, right? Just because it worked in phase 3 doesn't mean it's going to work in the real world or that anyone will care and adopt it. And so there's a real science to understanding what's going on. And the GCRC historically did not cover much of this. And so the CTSA program was created. It's the Clinical and Translational Science Award Program. It was launched in 2006. It has since grown to 62 academic medical centers, or AHCs, if I put that in some slides down the road, I can't remember, and in 31 states, including DC. And the stated mission, if you go to their website, is to accelerate discoveries toward better health. And the website says they are designed to strengthen and support the entire spectrum of translational research from scientific discovery to improved patient care. And these awards are funded through the National Center for Advancing Translational Science.
Hey Brett, can you go back to that slide for a second?
Yes,
You're planning on going early. I'm sorry to throw off your flow.
No.
I just want to point something out about translation. If you look at those arrows, they point in both directions in each of those things. And I think sometimes we look at basic science, it informs us and says, okay, this is how we design our trials. But when our trials don't get us the answers what we need to go back to our basic scientist friends and say, how would we design, now that we've learned that this doesn't work in humans, how do we design the next phase of animal trials? Or if the animal trials aren't telling us all we need to design our human trials, what is the additional information we need from preclinical models to make those things? That's something that's come up in many of the small groups. Gosh, it would be great, I want to mix together 100 neuroprotectants. That is awesome, right? That makes a lot of sense to me. But if nobody's ever done it in an animal, if I have a stroke, find 100 of the safest neuroprotectants that have been developed and failed when given by themselves, and give me all 100 of them, right? I mean, like, you can't propose that experiment in humans for the first time, though. You need to do it in animals first. So going back to the basic scientists and saying, these are the sorts of answers we need from the preclinical space. This is what we don't know. Gosh, do those sorts of experiments. So think about, just remember that those are not one-way arrows.
Right. That's a great point. And since I don't think I'm going to take the whole time, if you do have questions or comments, speak now. So it's better to do it now than try and remember it later. That's, in a sense, maybe that's part of what the whole CTSA was meant to do, right? It's meant to be more broad and to foster exactly that, right? We'll get more out of science if we just want to solve the question. And sometimes we have to work in this direction, sometimes we have to work back. That's a great point. Okay. So we talked about that. Here's a picture of a map of the CTSI sites across the US as of the website as of like 2 days ago when I was still making my slides. And I tried to go through and take all your institutions and say whether you had a CTSA award at your place. And if I got this all right, I think the answer is yes to the vast majority, but not for all of you. Anyone see an error on that slide? Okay. So the original charge of the CTSA program, I'm going to say sort of the history of the grant, was to create the academic home for clinical and translational research, provide investigators and research teams with research cores, tools, and an environment that encourages and facilitates the conduct of clinical and translational research, including the community and with industry partners. And part of that was to train the workforce of the future. And so part of this in a big sense was at many academic health centers there's sort of silos and people sort of learn their own way to do this. And it was meant to be a way to break down those silos, make the skills of the academic health center accessible to all to try and improve the science at that institution, which leads to better science for our nation. So the original grant, you had to have certain cores. Biomedical informatics and community engagement are highlighted because they were mandatory. All others, I believe, were not. And so biomedical informatics, just because that's an exploding part of science, right? The ability to harness big data and then to try and utilize big data, and that requires often special expertise, which includes not just meta-analysis of metadata like you might find in a clinical database or the EMR, but also genetics, genomics, and proteomics, where you're talking about literally billions of data points that have to be crunched all together and put into complex models. Biostatistics, epidemiology, and research design is kind of a no-brainer. The clinical translational research, I'm using our titles for these cores. They may be called something different at your cores. Throughout this talk, I'm going to use UC as a reference point in part because I had slides available to me, so that's laziness on my part. You can call that efficiency if you like. And also just because I think there's many variations on a theme, so bear with me. So the Clinical Translational Research Center is our old GCRC, and we'll talk about that in a future slide, but it's not just a physical place, but it also provides coordinator support and clinical trial research support outside of that unit. Community engagement, just very important to have the community involved. I mean, the NIH's global mission is to improve human health, right? And so it's great if we do a bunch of experiments in the ivory tower, but if we can't make human health better, then have we really accomplished the goal? And so we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's how to sort of engage the community, find out what the needs are in our local community, and make sure that the academic health center is synced with that, right? And just understanding the value of having the community be part of our research and helping us say why maybe your recruitment stinks because you never asked someone in the community why they can't sign up. If you don't provide enrollment after hours and weekends, some people with jobs won't do it. Maybe they don't want to park at your academic health center, but they'll do it at a community site. You know, there's some real insights to be gained from talking to people you want to do research with. So pilot and collaborative translational and clinical studies, pilot grants are a big part of most CTSA programs, and that's of course a great value to research for you guys. Regulatory knowledge and support, so that's great. That's often a big hassle and a big hurdle, and so having a core to help you with those kinds of issues is really helpful. And then research, education, training, and career development. So regardless of whether you get a K and have to define a research education program for yourself, one of my themes for this talk is get smart about research. This course helps, but it's probably the beginning and not the end. And it's really helpful to have very formal training and be sophisticated with statistics and trial design and methodology and a lot of other things. And so I think that's really important. Okay. So a few cores that I saw as just perusing a bunch of the sites from other CTSA awards. A specific core for child health exists in some of the CTSAs. Specific cores for drug discovery. Evaluation. So one of the things that the NIH wants with each CTSA is to have metrics of what have we accomplished with each award at each institution. And so some explicitly state that evaluation is a core. A studio core, so we'll talk about studios later. It's just really meetings to help grow research in a variety of ways. Or specifically a core for comparative effectiveness, because that's one of the buzzwords that's been thrown around the last couple of years, of course. Now, one of the things about the CTSA, so they started making these awards, and the plan was to have 60, and as you saw, there's 62. So they gave out the first 10, and you can imagine who the first 10 in were. It's a lot of the big powerhouse institutions in our country that you would see on the top 10 list of NIH awards. And they gave out a really generous budget for those sites. And then they said, whoa, we're not going to be able to afford 50 more sites with the amount of money we gave to those first 10. And so the next 50 or so had their budget cut back substantially. And in the process of resubmissions, everyone's getting kind of a right-sized budget. But it does have some impact on what services are available at your institution and how much you can get. So just to tell the history of the CTSA, then in 2012, the sites started coming back for competing renewals, and they decided that it would be good to have an independent evaluation of the program to make sure we're on the right course with the CTSA program. So they asked the Institute of Medicine to do that. Institute of Medicine formed an ad hoc committee, and they put a report together that was released in 2013. And I'm going to give you here at the bottom of this slide my interpretation of that report. Overall, they said CTSAs are good. They're working. We like them. Good program. A few things they mentioned specifically is that child health is probably underrepresented here and obviously important for human health. And so a little more emphasis on child health would be good. Community engagement is very important. I think community engagement is really hard, right? And academic health centers historically are not great at it. We're not at UC. Our Children's Hospital is great at it because often child research is done in schools and more community settings, right? That's where the kids are. They're not in the hospital. But we tend to do work more at the academic health centers. And so there was some, I think, discussion or hope on some parts that community engagement would be decreased in the next iteration of the CTSA. And in fact, they said explicitly they do not want that to happen, that this emphasis on community has been very important and worthwhile and should be maintained in the program going forward. This idea of cores was great, but what they found in their report was that frankly it created new silos, right? Where you might apply to the CTSA for services and get put into the biostatistics core, but you don't want to talk to regulatory because no one told you to. And in fact, all those cores would really be brought to bear ideally for each investigator that wants help. And so the core idea is meant to be a little de-emphasized in future CTSA work, so that there's not any siloization across the academic health center. And then there seemed to be a little bit of a new buzzword about team science, right? Which is good. Team science is good. Anyone in the room want to stop there and make comments?
Just one thing I wanted to say is that some people may not be aware that they have a CTSA because they're part of a, they may be linked to another site. So, for example, you know, so you may be like a, what do they call
like a satellite.
Yeah, a satellite to a CTSA.
Yeah.
And so that's important to know. It may not be like directly in your institution, but you can still take advantage of a lot of things in the CTSA.
Right. Right. And before CTSA grants got funded, a lot of people who were interested in them created basically the CTSA structure before they wrote the grant and got funded. It was meant to be an effort of good faith. The budgets, especially after the first 10 or 15 awards, were small enough that, frankly, and I don't know if this was the case for all the institutions, but each academic partner had to put money in. At least that's the way it goes at our place. And I think that's the case for all CTSAs, so that the funding comes partly from NIH, partly from each of the organizations represented at our academic health center. So if the NIH funding went away for us, we'd still have a pretty substantive program from our own internal funding. It's a commitment internally to grow research and support research at our institution with infrastructure. And even if you don't have a funded NIH award, you may have that infrastructure for just that reason. Right.
So the only comment I have is that I guess my experience is the CTSAs are great, but they're not always intuitive. And some of it is go out there and ask for help, and you learn a lot just by starting the process.
Well, that's going to be you're jumping right to the end of the end of my talk, right? So there are some bad things about the CTSA. This is all not sort of happiness. I think the structure is just so complex, right? And so rich with acronyms and buzzwords, and it's just sometimes really hard to access. We did a survey at our place and asked people who had received CTSA funded support if they knew what the CTSA was, and like 30% of them had never heard of it. We have a PR problem. But we'll talk about that a little bit. I think you're right. Some of the talk is going to be about how to, at least I'll show you how we do it for us, but it's very similar in most of your places. How do you access help from the CTSA? All right, I bring all this up, by the way, because it's time for competing renewals for the vast majority of sites. And so I'm describing the CTSA as it exists today, and it's going to be evolving a little bit at most of your sites. They're about to release, in fact, the RFA for the competing renewals. Most sites are on carryover right now. The award periods have ended while they're waiting to see how they wanted to restructure things. Okay, I guess one last more comment about that whole restructure process. Petra Kaufman, who has been with the NINDS for a long time, so a good friend to the neurosciences, has been now put in charge of this whole program at NCATS, which I think is a good thing, selfishly, because I like to see a neuroscientist working in this field and leading the program. So good for Petra. She's a wonderful person, and I think that's good for the program. So here's sort of the entree. Like, how do you normally get help with the CTSA? Well, at our place, you go to the website for the CTSA program, and you fill out a request for what services you want or need. And we make it pretty simple. I filled it out myself a couple times just to make sure I understood what we're asking people to do. It takes about 5-10 minutes tops. And then what happens is someone like a navigator will call you or email you within a couple days. And then they will find out more about your project. So you have to put it all on paper the first time and then say, well, let's figure out how we can help you. And then try and refer you to appropriate people to help give you the support that you need. And so at our place, for example, if you just want to use REDCap for an existing project, that's like a one-call finagle, and you usually get set up to use REDCap within 48 hours. If you want something more complex, then you're going to have to set up a meeting with someone, and it takes a little longer. But the idea is that you can get some of the services that we provide through the grant, hopefully sooner rather than later. It's kind of like a concierge meets you with just a little bit of background, gets more background, and refers you to the right place. Studios are something that happens in a lot of places. And there's several ways to do this. One is to bring others around you. So Vanderbilt's a great example of this. They have a very good CTSA. And what they do is they learn all about you and then say, what's good for you is you sat in a room with a statistician, an ethicist, a regulatory person, and a really experienced coordinator to help with recruitment, and maybe a community member who's good. And they arrange it all for you, and then you have a meeting that you talk about your project, and everyone gets input. That's pretty cool. It's probably the best one in the US, actually, in my opinion. We're not that sophisticated at UC yet, maybe in the future. Another thing, though, that we're our studios is to bring like-minded folks together. So we've just had a studio about TBI. We're trying to get everyone in our institution cross-academic health center, child and adult, basic, non-basic, clinical, all in one room. We kind of do it in a speed dating format. Everyone gets 90 seconds to talk about what they're doing, and then at the end of it, we try and put it all together and say, hey, we think there's 4 working groups here, that you ought to do this or this, and talk about, and meet separately, and we help facilitate that to try and grow ideas and partnerships and collaboration. Moving to community engagement. So again, I think I've sort of gone on my soapbox and told you how I think this is really important. As an aside, if you're a not-for-profit hospital, I bet every one of yours is, then actually there is a federal law and a duty to show that you have community outreach and that you provide community benefit as part of your not-for-profit status. And so there's a real natural symmetry to this, that if one of your missions is research, to show that you're engaging the community in your research. It's very helpful in fulfilling that part of your duty. So again, the key thing about community engaged research that makes it so hard is that you have to be truly engaged and you have to have a true partnership. The idea that you, like helicopter parents, if you're a helicopter researcher and you sort of live in the ivory tower but drop into the community, enroll 10 subjects and come back, that is not terribly popular with the community sometimes. And certainly if you're trying to really make a difference in that community, you have to show that it's going to be a bi-directional partnership. So some things, examples of this might be working on a region or a population and trying to create an intervention to change health in that population or neighborhood. And for that, you might need to have a full-time partnership with a church, organization, community leaders, people who are not-for-profit, health organization where you're sort of working with them collaboratively, where you're equal partners, not I'm the boss and you just do what I tell you to do and get people to sign up and enroll. That's truly community engaged research, and it's very difficult to do. At academic health centers, it tends to be under-recognized in terms of promotion and tenure, so that's why some people shy away from it. But I think this is a wave of the future. I would encourage you to think about it and how you can be more community engaged in your research. As I mentioned, there's some real value to meeting with community members and understanding their thoughts and concerns. And one thing that I think is kind of cool is to have a community board for large research studies, to have a couple people that weigh in and participate in meetings regularly. And as you talk about how the study's going, they can weigh in on any issues that are happening with recruitment or human subject treatment, concerns or complaints brought by subjects back to the team. Having an actual community member there makes it personal and real, and is of great value. So just something to think about. A common element that I saw across a lot of places is K-clubs or career development forums. And I would encourage you to get involved in whatever happens at your institution, even if you're not necessarily in the K path. Now, by the way, just one comment relative to the last talk. I think it's become sort of this ideal pathway, right? That without a KL2, then you go for a K08 or a K23, and that gives you your 5 years of protected time, and then you're right in line to apply for your R01, and that's sort of how we think of it, right? The same path doesn't have to be the same for everybody. So just turn on its ear for a second. Tom Brock, who's a really innovative thinker in stroke, one of our thought leaders in the field, once said to me when I was applying for a K, he said, well, what do you want to have 10 years from now? You want an R01, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, why not apply today? Why wait 10 years? I kind of did that. Like, yeah, that's kind of a crazy idea, but just crazy enough to work. So there's a lot of value to the K in terms of growing yourself and your skills, because I think research education is important, but just think about it. There's not one path for everyone. These K clubs are great because they do a lot of things. One is you get to network. At our K club, we bring in all kinds of people who are research superstars at our institution to meet with some of the new scientists we think are our future. It's a great chance to talk about not just your research and thinking about the project. We have people kind of present their ideas to the group and get real-time feedback from your peers. But also just hearing what works and doesn't work, sort of like you just heard in this talk, right? That brings great value. Someone who's walked a mile in those shoes, now you get to understand that. But also, you're around people just like you, same stage of your career, who are all trying to fight the same battle as you are. Should I say no to that committee? How do you deal with working at night when you got young kids and you're trying to find that work-life balance? I mean, there's a lot of things you share in common more than just your application. And so I think it's really great to be surrounded by peers. The way to do this often is at each of the CTSAs you can apply for sort of membership. I know we do this, but we copied a lot of other sites around the country when we started it. So you just have to go to the website usually and sign up. It's not like you have to pay to do it. It's not like you get a membership card at the end, but it's sort of just like getting on the mailing list, right, for your CTSA award locally. And then you'll know about all the events that are coming up, and you're more clued in to how to get into the CTSA. Who here is a member of their CTSA or signed up to be on a regular mailing list? Okay, not as many. So you have homework. I was supposed to give you homework. I don't know who got that around you. My homework for you is go to your CTSA site and read about it. Read the website.
I think I emailed them. I've sent them about 113 emails over the past month.
You probably didn't do them all. That's okay. I wouldn't either. But sign up for your CTSA. That's your new homework. Okay? If you don't read the whole site, just sign up. You'll learn it eventually. But take the time to do it sometime because you want to understand if any of these things apply to you. Here's our sign-up form, by the way. So you probably can't read that. But it has a couple things you have to fill in, like your name, a brief project description, your business director, because there might be charges that come back to your department eventually. Whether you're working with a biostatistician, and that gets you biostatistics, right? So biostatistical support is a common feature of all of the CTSAs, not just biostatistics, but research and methodology design, right? So if there's a good take-home plan, I hope someone said this, I'm sure they did, have your statistician involved from day one. It's not like you design a trial and then they're going to just throw in some stats for a power calculation. They will help you make an intelligent design. It's really valuable to do that. So please do. Here's some of the things we say that you get from the Bird Corps within our organization. So and Research Central is our name of our website where you sign in to get these services. But everything from specific aims, protocol, data collection, analysis, sample size, manuscript review. It's good to have statisticians review your manuscript, better to get data internally than externally. And ethics is part of our Bird Corps. We actually also have a medical devices collaborative. So biomedical informatics, you have the gist of what this is, right? So data warehousing and data interrogation, large data sets. So anyone know what I2B2 is?
Is that like R2?
R2D2 was the robot in Star Wars. Like, whoop, 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 whoop. This is not that. As I understand it, because I'm frankly kind of still trying to get my arms around this, that you have a way often to take large data sets and interrogate it yourself without biostatistical support, right? So I have a big R01 that's an epidemiology project, and we have a website that if people want to write papers from it, you can go request to do that. We're trying to get it set up in I2B2. Right now, you have to ask a question. Our statistician will give you the answer. We're wondering in the future if we could have you come in and ask a question and at least learn some basic things directly from the database independently. I believe that's what I2B2 is. It's over my head, and I'm one of the leaders of our CTSA, so I hope I'm saying that right. But for big genomics, genetics, proteomics data sets, small molecule screening, protein modeling, electronic health records, you can imagine these are the bread and butter of a biomedical informatics core. Most places also have education programs if you wanted to become an expert in biomedical informatics, which may be useful for your future careers. There's ways to take coursework or even get a degree in it at most places. And then part of biomedical informatics is the whole data capture part. I stepped out for a minute, but I think you heard about RedCap before. You've heard about it before, yes? Yeah, so most of you have used it, so it's a database system that is very useful, certainly approved by the NIH, HIPAA compliant, meets all federal regulations, and it's very useful. It's customizable, you can build case report forms into it, it's easily exported into statistical software packages, and it's got all kinds of great features, and so including a survey feature that's very useful. Better to use RedCap Survey than SurveyMonkey, right? SurveyMonkey doesn't really meet a lot of research requirements in terms of HIPAA and everything else. So this should be your survey tool, not a web-based tool. And so it's something that does require a little bit of training, and if you're working it yourself, you might want to get that through your CTSA site. I bring up chargeback just because it's good to remember that even though these grants exist, it's not always free. Our site, our own personal way of doing it is 10 hours free, up to 20 hours if you're working with an MS level, and 10 if you're working with a PhD. And after that, we have some ways to get additional hours, but we can charge back to the departments. And I'm a department chair, so I will tell you that if people are succeeding in their research, I'm happy to pay this kind of fee, right? It's not super expensive, but we're finding in our place people don't often need 10 hours, right? If they have a lot of good stuff going on, they're well mentored, they may just need a little help and support. But you should know what the rules are at your institution. It's not always free, and you want to make sure that you're just cognizant of what the cost might be. Pilot grants. That's a big deal, right? It's always nice to have some money to support your research. Makes your chair happy. I'm one of those too. What kind of things are pilot grants at most institutions? I used ours, but I think this represents probably all of your sites as well. So new investigators. Very good target for pilot grant funding. Collaborations between basic and clinical people. That's something that we want to foster, right, to make that whole spectrum. Interdisciplinary studies, especially if it's multi-institutional interdisciplinary. We're trying to build bridges and create teams. Academic community partnerships, again, fostering that community engagement core, and then especially if there's grants between institutions. Anyone else aware of other different kinds of pilot grants at their institutions? All right, well, you'll have homework, you can go find out. I just show this as, network analysis for what it's worth. It just shows, are you making connections and are you building teams? And so you can just see that from 2009 to 2013, we obviously have more complexity, more collaboration, and better team building. So it's working. All right, regulatory knowledge and support. So, this is complicated, right? This is just part of the drudgery of doing research that you have to follow the regulatory paperwork. And whether it's IRBs, whether it's INDs, FDA paperwork, it's a lot of regulatory issues to be dealt with in research. And so a regulatory core can be very helpful in helping you navigate those waters, especially if you're new to it. I bring up a couple things. So IRB consortia are something that a lot of CTSAs are working on. Certainly we put a lot of effort into this in Cincinnati, and we've been successful actually creating a citywide IRB consortium. So if one of the sites approves a protocol, other sites will defer to that IRB and accept it. You have memorandum understanding between them. So in Cincinnati, and perhaps your region, if you have one site that's approved it, you might be able to turn a one-site study into a multi-site study, which is a big deal in terms of recruitment potentially. So there's also multi-network CTSAs. So across Ohio, there's a statewide memorandum of understanding. So if we had a project in Cincinnati, or if Ohio State had one, we would agree that our IRBs would defer to the other. We would allow a multi-institutional, two different cities, project to occur. So that just facilitates research. It helps build teams across regions and across institutions. So look for that in your community. Some of the other things our regulatory core has done, just as an example, is that we've had special symposia on hot topics. So biobanking is really hard. There's a lot of research issues around bank samples and how they can be used and who owns them, and this is a hot topic, and that's a good thing to discuss. EHR research, that's a hot topic. Conflict of interest, responsible authorship, social networking, how do you handle all these things to be regulatory compliant and still harness the power of some of these things. That's been some of the, we had special symposia, like day-long meetings about this in Cincinnati, and I'm sure similar things have existed elsewhere. Also, a lot of the feature of the CTSAs is centralized training. So whether you're a researcher at our children's hospital or our main hospital, we all do the same city training. City is the most common regulatory web-based training module across the US, and it's helpful to have it so you fulfill all your requirements for all institutions in one city. So we have it for all of our institutions. Okay, so the old GCRC, the CTRC, there's an example of why the CTSAs are bad, right? So how many letters did I just put together there? The old GCRC, which we now call CTRC. That's why CTSAs are hard to catch on. But this is sort of is there still a physical unit? Yes, there is at our place, and I'm sure at most of yours as well. We, in fact, have 3 of them. So 2 children's, 1, and then a satellite at the VA. Again, one of the core services, you can bring people in in. We have biochemistry, behavioral science, body composition, bionutrition. We have fluoro for C-arm. We have pharmacokinetics. We have all kinds of services that we provide as part of utilizing that facility for research. And to make it more broad and not just restricted to those sites, we and a lot of other CTSAs that I saw online provide sort of support where those services come to you. So we refer to it as a scatterbed support. So if you wanted to do a PK study, but you're going to enroll patients into the hospital, the nurses can come out to the hospital. They have privileges and will draw your samples for the PK study. Make sense? So it's not just geographic, but it can be utilized everywhere. And so part of the CTRC and whatever core you call yours is for subject recruitment and retention. And so that's generally the home of where these things happen. So you should try and utilize help at your institution for how can you improve recruitment. Anyone ever hear of Research Match? Anyone signed up as a subject in Research Match? Oh, come on now. If you want people to go in, you better sign up yourself. And you should, just as an experiment, right, to see if you ever get contacted about a study. Research Match is from Vanderbilt. They have a great bioinformatics core there. And what was sort of realized is that almost every institution has these little databases that exist, right? And whatever your area of expertise is, you signed up 50 people who you thought, that'd be good to call someday, this list of people. When I get my next study for stroke recovery, I want 50 people who have chronic stroke who are interested in research. And you keep it on an Excel spreadsheet in a non-compliant fashion. And so what was created was a national way to do this, which is Research Match. And so literally well, this has 12,000 volunteers. I think it's more like 15. This is kind of an old slide. But this is a nationwide registry where you can utilize the web-based, HIPAA-compliant, NIH-approved system to sign people up with their basic interest. I've signed up. It takes literally about 2 to 4 minutes to sign up and put in all your data. I just said I want to be informed about if I'm eligible for any stroke studies, or I forget what else I put in. And so then what happens is that a researcher can go in and you can actually, without utilizing the full services, just log in as I forget what they call it, a researcher interest form. So you would just say, I want to know how many strokes there are within 100 miles of me. And it'll tell you. And some diseases are better represented than others. And then you can sign up as a researcher, where you really, it takes about 15 minutes to do this. It's more like filling out your form and then attaching your IRB-approved protocol. It goes to a review, which at our institution is me, and I just check to make sure your IRB is accurate. And if that's the case, this is just like a web-based dating service for a researcher and an interested research subject, right? We have had some trials, especially for relatively healthy people, they'll enroll 100 people based on Research Match, right? And frankly, what I tell people at our place is, if you take 15 minutes and fill this out and get one subject in, because every subject is like gold when you're recruiting for a clinical trial. If you just get one subject because of a random web hit, why would you not do that, right? And for that reason, why would you not, if you have a disease of interest, try and get your people you see clinically to sign up for Research Match? So go ahead and take a look at this. It's a very good system. It's very well done.
Now, does Cincinnati have a similar thing? Because I know that in Michigan they have something that they set up locally. Because I wonder if the Michigan thing talks to that, because I think the Michigan thing ought to talk to that. I'm like a healthy volunteer, registered in the Michigan thing.
Well, I mean, not everyone buys into everything with the CTSA. That's one of my take-home points, right? So the CTSA didn't change the way everybody does business. And so if you had a successful registry, part of what you might say is, gee, why should we change and start using this? I thought that they dumped the Michigan registry into this, but I'm not sure.
Or, I mean, even if you don't get rid of your existing one, if there's sort of cross-talk so that they talk in sort of both directions, right. Like it feeds the data.
Right. So the great thing about this, though, is that it's nationwide, right? So I don't have access to Will's registry in Michigan, but Ohio State is in this. And again, just to, Ohio State, I'm going to tell you, decided they were going to, with their CTSA, make this a big focus. And they had Research Match buttons, and they had kiosks in the lobby, and they are the #1 enroller in the, I believe, in the last I looked. Vanderbilt's trying to catch up or beat them, right? Because it's their registry and they want to win. But Ohio State for a long time was winning in terms of just a very aggressive sign-up program. And so for me, it's a huge boon, right? If I put 150 miles into my geography of who wants to be interested in a stroke trial, a lot of people in Columbus are going to get an email about my study. So,
well, if Ohio State is winning here, I think we'll be able to get Michigan better involved.
Right, I prompted that to see if I could really tick Will off. So I trained in Michigan. I understand the tension. I lean towards Michigan. Ohio State's a bunch of cheaters. Just saying. So look at Research Match. It's a really cool website. I mean, all credit to Vanderbilt. They did a wonderful job with this. And if it's of use to you, again, if you once in your life get one subject, it was worth it. It takes so little effort. Really think about this. Okay. Oh, and by the way, www.researchmatch.org. All right. Research education, so I'm just going to show you a couple things that we do, but everyone is probably the same on this, right? Of course you can get master's degrees or PhD, and you can see for us we offer a bunch of different tracks you can take your master's in, whether it's molecular, clinical effectiveness, trials, translational, informatics, quality improvement. And then we have a bunch of tailored programs, right? We have a summer program that we put a lot of our fellows through, that you get basic biostats, a SAS lab, epidemiology, and ethics. That's sort of a nice little beginner course, like an appetizer plate for someone who's doing training and wants to get some basics. We created this certificate. I think a lot of places have something like this also. Even if it's part of a K, you may not want to have so much time devoted to the classroom that you're getting a master's but not publishing any papers, doing your clinical work, and writing your grant, right? Getting a master's takes a lot of time. So we have the certificate program it's like half of a master's basically. And we're trying to get fits for everybody. No matter what your needs are, there's some program that fits for you. And I bet the same is true in most of your CTSAs. So we have a fellowship program. We even have programs for high school, college, and other health professions. And then we do grant rounds, and most places do this as well. So a variety of sort of broad research topic interests that are available at your site. The career development, we talked about this already, so I'm not going to dwell on it. I would point out that most places do some of these things. A library of funded grants, you don't want to make it a template, but it helps to see what worked, right? And I sit on study section. I'll just tell you that one of the great things about study section is you see all kinds of grants, and it teaches you a lot about grant writing. And there's just no substitute for reading other people's grants. You don't have to be on study section to do that. You see some that worked and some that failed, but the difference is apparent, and it's a good lesson. It's time well spent. Technical writing, some people have grant writers at their institutions, and I've never used one, so I have no idea how that works. But I would say that writing assistance, whether it's grammatical and spell checking and stylistic points, or frankly, standard text. So there's that whole institutional, you describe all the facilities that you have. We have one that's fully written and updated annually, and that saves weeks of work. Just putting that stuff together is a big pain in the butt. So if they have something pre-prepared at your institution, bonus for you. And then internal reviews. It is so much better to get beat up by your friends and not your study section. So you can't have enough people review your grants. Your friends and colleagues, whether your department will pay for external review. We have a College of Medicine study section. It meets 3 times a year. It's hard to get people to review on it, but we literally take grants before they go to NIH and perform a real study section review on them. All right, we mentioned KL2s and also Birch Scholars, K-12. Nice ways to get a little bit of funding and support as you move towards additional future grants. We talked about membership a little bit. This is just our home page where you see you have a membership login and then become a member. We happen to have 2,500 members. And when you do membership, what you see here is you have to fill in your skills and interests. And it's like putting in keywords, right? Because we take these and then we put them into a database where you can go onto our site and say, hey, I'm looking for someone with interest in genomics. And you can find out in 2 seconds everyone who does genomics at your place. All the CTSAs have this. This is not uncommon, right? And that's a good way to sort of meet people and build a team that have relevant interests for you. So to sum up, the CTSA program is good. There's, it's infrastructure, right? You know the help you can get. This is hard. NIH funding is hard and research is hard. It's valuable and it's fun and it's a great career, but it's hard. And so research infrastructure helps. help you succeed. You want to connect across your health center, across your community, and perhaps across the nation. The program is meant to break down silos, and that's helped for sure. It could even improve the efficiency of your research, and as you learn from your community how to recruit better, if you use Research Match, maybe you'll recruit better into your clinical trial. Getting pilot awards to help buy some time if you need that time, to help gain some financial support to take the next step. Very important, every dollar counts. Research education, like I said, get smart about research. It's going to improve your chances of success. Career development, again, to some degree. I think that don't neglect how hard it is to do this, right? The previous speaker showed the kids growing up, and my pictures would look exactly the same. This is a hard thing to do. And you know, it's good to have that. Some places have really well put together faculty support institutions or faculty development institutions, and take advantage of that if that exists at your place. And just to build a network of social support, of friends and colleagues that you can work with, and moment to over a beer. That's very therapeutic. It's cheaper than therapy sessions. And then, of course, CTSA has created networks that are local, regional, and national, and that can be quite valuable for advancing research programs. There is some bad. It's not all sunshine and kittens and rainbows. So the CTSA is hard to access. Lots of acronyms, too many buzzwords, complicated structure. When you try and be all things to all researchers across complex organizations, no CTSA looks the same. They're all difficult to access, and they all have the same kinds of problems. As an example, I was the co-core director of community engagement, and we had these conference calls where 2 people from each institution would call in across 60 institutions, a conference call with 120 people. And here's the way it went. We'd log in, 20 people would log in, you'd hear the beep, 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 over and over again. Some guy was always doing it from the cafeteria. We'd say 20 times, hey, please mute your phone, please mute your phone. And you could hear them getting paged and talking to someone. And it was just, sometimes trying to be too much is hard, right? The cores may have created silos. All CTAs don't do the same things, and some have more resources than others. They were a little less transformative than intended. These were meant to help, and they're kind of new. Most of the successful R01, multi-R01 investigators at your place probably don't participate. They don't need to, right? They blaze their own path. They have their own way of doing it. They have everything they need. Obviously, it worked, right? So they're not, if you come to get mentored by someone who's a big-time scientist at your institution, they may not have anything to do with the CTSA, right? And so you don't have to use it. Maybe you have a path that's all set that you can follow, but certainly take advantage of what you can. So the CTSA is a resource. It's possibly a tool in your toolkit to succeed. Take the time to read your website, figure out what you can get, and see if it helps you. And be mindful about your research education, your making your career work, being happy, finding balance in your life, and then collaborate, because team science is good. That's it. I'll take any questions that you have now, or we can have a discussion.
Or we don't, I guess, have to have a discussion.
So, Brett, Southern UVA, thank you so much for that. Obviously, I'm one of the folks on the list whose institution does not have a CTSA. So what advice do you have? But I feel like that because of that, the institution's probably installed a lot of things that are important components of the CTSA. It still has the old GCRC, which they now call the CRU,
right?
And has cores and all that cores. So but an hour, a little more than an hour away, Virginia Commonwealth University has a CTSA. So is this the sort of thing where sort of staying working with my institution, or is it that worthwhile that maybe I should reach out to the friendly neighborhood CTSA, or maybe even a collaborator in another institution?
Yeah.
Any advice on that?
Yeah. No. So a couple comments. First, you have Karen Johnson, who's like a one-woman CTSA, and it's like a big bear hug.
She's talking about shining over the.
I'm sure that's true. So, I think you have to find your own path. First of all, and I think you may be able to find everything you need at UVA, which is a terrific institution. But CTSAs are definitely not opposed to sharing. We have of our 2,500 members, there's a handful that are from other institutions. And we're not sure if they signed up just to kind of spy and see what we're doing, which is okay, because we're trying to, there's nothing we have to hide. We're trying to share everything. All of our best programs, we're trying to roll out. And we're proudest of the programs that other places have adopted, right? But if someone came to us and said, hey, I just need help and I'd like to do research, and I don't know that we'd be opposed to it. I mean, it sort of is the spirit of the CTSA, and probably the only barrier is, you know, finances, right? So as part of the grant, just to make sure we're protecting that we're serving our community, we'd probably want a collaborator on site. But if you had a collaborator at a CTSA site, I'm sure that would be no problem, or even a mentor who's a part-time mentor for you. One of the things that we require is we ask everyone, do you have a mentor? And we prefer that you do. So I think there's ways to access that. And as Lori said, sometimes there's places that are folks attached to other CTSAs and have little satellites. And Kentucky finally got theirs in Lexington. They were one of the last sites in, but in fact we were very much in the process of developing a plan for them to be linked to us if they didn't get funding. So you should inquire and make sure that you're not as focused somewhere else. Any other questions or discussion? All right, thanks you guys. Good luck.